What's up, people? This is Anthony from AFDS coming to y'all with our first tutorial video. Y'all have been waiting for one for a long time now, and honestly, we probably should have made this during the holidays, but I digress. Quick disclaimer before we continue, I try to make these tips in order. You can use them however you wish. Also, they aren't concrete and steadfast tips that have been agreed upon by like every artist ever. These are just what helped me get to where I am in my art voyage. I'm also going to have some demonstrations of what I'm talking about to make things a bit more practical for all of us. Now with all that out of the way, let's finally begin. For our first tip, we've got mastering the triangle theory. Now I'm sure there's a better name for this out there somewhere, but this is just the one I came up with. Don't worry, it isn't some special technique you can use to draw different head shapes or different proportions. It's more of a mindset to have while drawing any image. Look at this triangle right here. You see it? Good. Now I'm gonna flip it. Okay, notice how the shape starts broader and gets smaller towards the end until the pinpoint. That's great. Previously we saw the triangle on the right side up. That point at the top is where most of us are at the start of our art voyage. As beginners, whenever we're drawing a piece or whenever you start a piece, we are more inclined to focus on the minor details of our image. For example, we may begin an image for a full body by starting with the head, drawing all the guidelines for the head and then moving on to the next part. Wrong. It's a mistake that I tend to follow as well, but unless you're like an art god or something, I find that focusing on the overall image first promises success. Then you can erase and redraw using the guidelines you've just created. You can apply this tip to any project that you may be working on. It really helps organize your thoughts, and honestly, it reduces the intimidation that may come from drawing larger pieces. The main point is, focus on larger shapes and then adjust until you've arrived at your desired conclusion. Speaking of shapes, our second tip involves mastering drawing 2D and 3D shapes. Yep, all those times we were drawing different shapes in our notebooks, all the squares, cylinders, and etc. All that stuff is going to come in handy at this stage. By practicing with these shapes, we start to see things on a higher level. It's no longer just 2D, we're able to see things in 3D. And seeing things in 3D allows us to create more realistic and more accurate forms. Okay, here we have 3 images to show kind of an idea of what we were talking about earlier. As you can see here, I'm just simply trying to divide the shapes. For the first one, you can see that I'm using mostly cylinders to get it right, and maybe some triangles and stuff to get the feet and all that. The second one's a bit more complex because the individual has her arms kind of going in front of the image, but it's the same basic idea. Bunch of cylinders, trapezoid, I think that's the name of the shape. Some circles for the shoulders, and more cylinders for the arms. Now for the third one, because of the angle, I decided to go with kind of a cuboid type shape, and the same thing for the waist. Cylinders for the arms, and then for the legs, cylinders as well. I did a little bit of a cylinder for the bust, and triangles for the feet. Yeah, as you can see here, though it's not perfect, I managed to create sort of a short visualization of what cubes and what shapes can do to make a human body. Of course, that isn't to say that you're going to use these forever, but they are indeed a critical tool for a beginner. The main point is, learning and understanding 3D and 2D shapes helps one simplify complex structures. We're going to come back to these shapes later. But herein lies an issue. Being stuck with applying geometric form leads to rigid and stiff-looking images. How do we remedy this dilemma? Simple. By mastering gesture. This is that one lesson that we were taught in high school. as it is paramount for being able to develop the human form. Some may even argue, as are more important than knowing all the different muscles and specific crevices of the human body. Wikipedia, yes, Wikipedia, defines gesture as a laying in of the action, form, and pose of a model or figure. As such, in my experience so far, after observing your references, this should be the first step of drawing the human body. If we go back to the first tip mentioned in the video, at this stage you are simply laying down a broad and free groundwork for an art piece upon which you will build and fine-tune until you are complete. This stage in the drawing process for me has typically been the most fun and the most largely experimental part. You aren't finalizing details, and nothing is permanent. All you're focusing on is capturing all the necessary curved lines that can tell a viewer of the piece enough to know what the pose is supposed to be. At a good understanding of this concept, you should be able to draw a gesture from a reference image while capturing just the necessary information of the pose in 1 minute. Yes, 1 minute. Okay, so I'm gonna use this pose for example. And on the mark, get set, go. Alright, so we have her head. Use a line to show the direction of her face. Draw head and neck. Get the spine. Draw in the shoulders. Get this. As you can see, kind of understanding, I guess, it kind of makes an analogy you have of 3D shapes and all the 3D shapes and kind of the loose lines of gesture. And what you're doing is you're creating a pose. Okay, we've got the main thing now. Just add the fine details. And time's up. Yep. That's one reference. We're gonna do one more. So let me get that ready. Here we go. A bit more of a complex pose. Let's see if I can pull this one off. 3, 2, 1, go. Start off with the head again. Keep it in the direction that we need it to be. Its spine's a little bit curved. As you can see, focusing on the core shapes of the body. Trying to use cylinders to get the hands. Okay, now we've got the basic stuff. We can begin adding all the details. Yeah, so this is this is a pretty ugly sketch. That's finished, so the minute's over now. The general idea of it is that as you see this, you can start to add, all you have to do is lower the opacity and then start adding more, details, This is when you can start focusing more on the forms, and all that stuff. But once you've got the major shape in, once you've got the gesture in, yeah, it makes it more fluid, it makes it more breathable, it makes it more pleasing to the eye and less rigid. The main point is practicing on your gesture by doing 10-minute drills at a time, drawing 10 poses for each minute using a reference, will indeed lead to more natural, more fluid, and less rigid poses. At this point, y'all must have heard me use the word reference a lot. Now's the time to move on to the next tip. As a beginner trying to learn about the human form, be wary of using anime or cartoon references. Now this may come as a shock to some of you. It certainly was for me. Back in the day, when I used to draw DBZ characters and Pokemon and stuff, it seemed like I was an expert, but alas, such is not the case. If your goal is simply to copy and paste an image or an image's style onto yours, then you're watching the wrong video. See all the bosses out there? Taite Kubo, Kohei Horikoshi, Alex Ross, Jim Lee, Yusuke Murata, etc. They're all amazing, but no matter how you twist it, their works are stylized to their own taste. The abs Yusuke Murata and Jim Lee draw are distinctly different from one another, but they both look amazing, don't they? These artists all had to learn the rules and then demolish them in their own various ways. Art style is not an excuse. Once you've understood the fundamentals, you'll be able to use your own art style in many more ways than you thought you could before. I've always been a firm believer that if you intend to go into art seriously, your artwork over time should become like a second signature for you. Eventually, the goal should be that if someone saw your art, they should immediately recognize it as yours. After all, isn't art a non-verbal form of expression? Granted, that doesn't mean that you can't pick up things from other artists. Once you're comfortable with your basics, you can then begin to stylize and implement different little things from various works. Now, let's look at references. Master using references. Unless you are part of the 1% of individuals that are savant, you are an experienced artist, or you are an art god, you likely don't have all the knowledge you need to create marvelous images. Let's go back to those shapes from earlier. Even if you think you suck at drawing, you can only draw a stickman or whatever, you probably have an idea of how to draw a cube. If maybe not that, then one of those S's from elementary school. But why is that? It's probably because you've seen those things 1,000 times. They're pretty much etched into the shelves of your mental library at this point. This same principle applies to drawing. Over time, just like the cube, there are things that you'll be able to draw without the need for a reference, and there are others that you will need a reference. Never ever be afraid to pull up a reference image for whatever you need, whether it's for a zipper, a specific pose, or your grandma's dentures. A question we often get asked is, where do I find a good reference? Well, the internet exists, but if you're lazy like me, then here's some resources. I find that the best reference for human poses and forms, period, is simply a pic with your phone. Simply taking a picture of the body part saves time looking online for unhelpful references. You can even get a friend to pose, or you can take picture of a friend when you want to get more complex poses. It is the most accurate form you can get, as there's no photoshopping in real life. Wait, hang on a sec. In case you don't have anyone to help with the larger forms and more complex posing, your last resort should be the internet. Typically, I use Pinterest for more broad references, and I use Google for more specific ones. For example, I use Google to learn some of the specific muscle groups in the body, and I apply that knowledge to a second sketch after the gesture drawing stage. See, it's all coming together. Try as much as possible to avoid stylized images, as it's difficult to learn accurately from an image that is skewed for whatever reason. All the tips we discussed today will cover a long period of time. Is there a quicker way to get through all of it? Well, the answer comes in our final tip. No, your progress will take time, and you have to acknowledge that. Here's a post I made from September of 2020. And here's one from last Thursday. Though the styles are similar, there are many changes, right? That's the point. Just like learning your first language or learning how to drive, knowledge is amassed over time. Don't feel bummed out if you didn't draw for 12 hours a day, every day last week. I mean, if you managed to do this, you're amazing. Over the years, a lot of my improvement came more from observing the world around me and implementing the things I liked in other works and in other mediums. One tip I could give on this is follow a lot of amazing artists you see on Instagram, Twitter, or watch a good number of YouTube tutorials on specific techniques. This isn't for you to compare yourself to them, as we all unfortunately do. Instead, each time you draw any piece, Experiment with different things you've seen and picked up from those artists and videos. Whatever works, works. And like this, you begin to improve exponentially. Use every drawing you make as practice time and an opportunity to experiment and come up with something new. If you don't like the outcome, try again and mix up some other idea. To summarize everything we've said today, focus on broader shapes and then adjust the project until you've arrived at your desired conclusion. Master drawing 2D and 3D shapes to build forms. Mastering gesture allows for more fluid and less rigid art. You can then use these gestures as a framework upon which you can use shapes to build the forms of the body. While still learning, stay away from anime or cartoons for reference, as they are highly stylized, and look out for more accurate and realistic reference. Once you've picked up the fundamentals, you can then begin to implement different things you see in your heroes' art styles. And finally, don't expect large progress to come immediately. Instead, spend time focusing on the specific things you need to learn and grow from it. In the end, you'll learn from your mistakes and eventually you will master drawing poses. Thank you so much for reaching the end of the video. Remember, these are the tips and tricks I've used and continue to use in my art voyage. They may not work for everyone. If you have any other tricks or better solutions than those mentioned in the video, let us know down below in the comments. If you found this video useful, please like and subscribe and share to others looking for these tips. Also, let us know what other tutorials y'all would like us to make. With the time restriction from school and our upcoming webcomic, Bird Mask, we are probably going to try and post either once or twice a month. For now, this is AFDS, and we're going to take off.